Hi, I'm Liam from Radium Performance, and this is going to be an introductory video to the Mach 1 electric skateboard. We're going to go over quite a few things about the remote, the specs of the board, tips and tricks, and dialing it in for your weight and getting the feel out of it that you want. The video is going to be time-stamped, so you can just jump to the point that's relevant to you. So first things first, we're going to cover just the basic specs of the board. So it's a dual motor rear driven board with our own custom designed 6485 motors that I've actually personally put over 200 hours into developing with the factory. And so these are the highest performance motors on the market of their size. We've actually done proper dyno testing, and this board is pushing 8,000 watts into the motors, which is over 10 horsepower. It's a 12S system, and we use that for reliability. So we've been running this same motor controller and motor configuration for a very long time, and it's almost bulletproof. So that's the reason that we're on 12S here. The battery is a 1000 watt hour multi-cell P42A, 12S 6P, and that gets us to about 30 to 40 kilometer range. Obviously depending on how hard you ride. So if you ride slow, like you're a beginner, you'll probably get quite a bit more range than that potentially. But if you're riding fast and you're a heavy rider, you might even get slightly less. These motors can go from being extremely efficient to extremely power thirsty. You might also be wondering, like, why does this board get less range than say like an Evolve or an Ace deck that has a smaller battery like a 12S 4P? Those boards are not pushing as much power as this board is. So when you're using that much power, you're going to drain the battery very quickly. So this board has the capability to match the range of lower spec boards, but obviously if you're using that throttle a lot, it's going to drain the big battery pretty quickly. So it's just because of the higher level of performance. Also, our high performing rubber wheels are admittedly a little bit thirsty on battery, but it's so worth it just because the level of grip and comfort and just the feeling that they offer is going to be, I think, what most people prefer. But this board is compatible with other wheels. So to go over some more specs, so we've got our custom SR125 wheels. So the board comes standard with the 125 millimeter Radium solid rubber wheels. They're a actual real rubber compound, like the same sort of rubber that you would have in your car or motorcycle tires. It provides a lot of grip and comfort as well. So rubber is very good at naturally dampening and absorbing vibration. And to increase that, we've actually added compression holes into the wheel, which help to further reduce vibration, absorb impacts, and also provide extra grip and reduce the weight of the wheel as well. This board's actually running 28 millimeter diameter bearings as opposed to the 22 millimeter that you would normally have in a standard skateboard. And we're also using 10 millimeter axles as well. The reasons for this are numerous, but basically we were originally on 8 millimeter axles and we just kept breaking axles constantly. We used the best steel, the best heat treating, and we were still breaking axles. So this board is just so fast, and the suspension allows you to hit bumps so hard without even feeling it, that it really puts a lot of stress into all the components because you as the rider are not feeling what the board is having to go through. And so we just had to make a tough call to upgrade to 10 millimeter axles, and we upgraded our wheels to 28 mil bearings because we were also blowing through standard skate bearings like all the time. We were using the best bearings. Zealous are like the best we tested out of all of the different bearings, and we just kept blowing through them. So that's why we're using the 28 millimeter NSK high quality bearings so that we never have to worry about bearing issues again. We've even innovated with our pulley system. So with the new Radium core hub, we made an improvement to the pulleys where instead of having to use a support bearing in the pulley, now the pulley is just bolted directly to the wheel like a mountain board. So that's one less component to worry about, less parts to fail, and lighter weight, significantly lighter weight. We saved about 100 grams just making that change alone. It's a belt drive system, so you can run different wheels. We've got a carbon fiber deck. It's actually a hollow deck, so there's hollow segments inside of it. The deck weighs just over 1 kilogram. The enclosure is also a carbon fiber tub as well. And then the suspension actually bolts directly to the enclosure. So we've got a single pivot suspension system in here as well, and it uses these custom tall bushings with a shock absorbing compound. You can actually use normal tall bushings from different brands like Riptide or something. You could put those in if you wanted to do some experimenting, but we've developed a custom formula that just works better for absorbing vibration. It's running the Radium R6 trucks. They're called R6 because it's our 6th revision. We've gone through 6 different truck designs to come to this design, which is the best compromise between simplicity, cost, reliability, and just performance. The stability of this board is amazing. So we've got a 30-degree rear steering angle and a 60-degree front steering angle, which means that you've got twice as much steering coming from the front of the board. So you really want to get used to using your front foot to do a lot of the work for turning. But what that does is it gives you just extreme stability at high speeds and still allows you to maneuver very, very well at low speeds, because the front of the board is the lightest side of the board. It's away from all the motors. So when you have all your steering there, it means you're not having to swing around the weight of all the motors and everything at the back. It's just more direct and more controlled steering. We've also got the RTS, Radium torque steering system on this board. So basically every single one of the production boards has shipped with RTS. Not a single person chose not to install RTS. So we've just made that the absolute standard that these boards come with, because it does take the board to a whole nother level. It really just brings the Mach 1 to life. And the RTS system basically includes a steering angle sensor in the front truck. It's very well hidden. You can't really see it unless you're looking for it. And it's got a control system inside that we can have a look at in a bit, which delivers different levels of power to each rear motor. So you've got independent control of the rear motors, which actually can do power steering of the rear truck. It's pretty fancy and cool. And we'll go through how to tune all that stuff in the app, because it can get a bit complicated in regards to tuning. But it does really allow you to even change the way the board feels just by playing with settings on an app. And yeah, so that pretty much covers all the basic specs. We'll go through some more simple stuff now. So like the power button to turn the board on, it is at the rear on the rear swing arm, and it's just right here. So you press it once to turn the board on, and you'll hear a faint beep if you have young ears. That tells you that the board is on. It does take a few seconds to turn on. And then if you want to turn the board off, you just press and hold for a moment, let go, and then the light will turn off. The next thing is charging is also on the rear swing arm. So there's a little cover that you just squeeze and remove. And then your SA12 connector clips into that. The red dot on the connector faces towards the motors. That's how you line it up. So you'll find the remote in the accessories box. We use the Hoyt Puck remote, which is designed by FlySky. It is the safest remote on the market by far, and that's the reason that we use it. So it has channel hopping ability across 16 channels, so it instantly hops to a different channel if there's any interference, and we've never had any issues with this remote. Like, it's just been rock solid. And when you're doing 70 plus kilometers per hour on a board, you want something rock solid, because, you know, it's safety critical, right? In terms of battery care, so you don't want to leave your board, or any board for that matter, or any device with lithium-ion battery, you don't want to leave it sitting at full charge for a very long time, say more than a week. The longer you leave a lithium battery sitting at full charge, the more it's sort of being damaged internally. Basically, the way lithium batteries work is that they love to be stored in a happy middle region. So, you know, ideally closest to nominal charge, sort of between say 40 to 70%, the battery is the most happy, and it likes being left there for a long time. If you leave the board close to empty, that's also not a good idea for two reasons. First, it's still going to be slowly damaging the battery over time, just like leaving it at full charge. But the other reason it's quite important is that while the board has minimal parasitic drain, which means usage of power while it is turned off, it still does have some residual drain. And so if you leave the board empty for a few months and you go away, for example, or you store it, if the board is empty, the battery could drain past the minimum safe voltage of 2.5 volts per cell. And what that will do is permanently damage the battery, and you'll need a new battery pack. So if you're going away or storing the board for a long time, or even just sending it in transport, I highly recommend charging the battery to a higher state of charge, such as 70% or even 80% if you're going to go away for a very long time, you know, say 6 months to a year. 80% would be ideal. But if you're just going to leave it for short whiles, just make sure that you don't leave the board sitting at empty state of charge. You never want to leave your board charging unattended. While we've got a lot of safety systems in place, you should always charge the board supervised. To check the battery level of the board, at the moment there is a couple of ways. So if you haven't got the Radium app installed yet, you can use the BMS app. So if you ordered this board, you would have been sent a link to download the app for the BMS. And there's one way you can check the battery level, but you will have to go off the cell voltage because the BMS app itself is not very good at showing you battery percentage. In fact, it'll probably be stuck at 100%. And so you can use the BMS app, and also then obviously the Radium app is going to tell you your battery percentage and voltage as well. Now you might be wondering, because this board has a VESC, why can't you connect to the VESC with the VESC app? And that is because we don't have a Bluetooth module in here for the VESC for a very good reason. We've just seen way too many people having issues with the VESC. In fact, even myself, it is so easy to press the wrong button and just wipe all the settings, and this board is pretty complicated with the RTS system. So we did not include a Bluetooth module for the VESC, so you won't be able to talk to the VESC. However, the RTS system is able to talk to the VESC, and our app will be upgraded over time with more features to be able to look at things like your odometer to know how far you've traveled. And so the app is another thing that we're still actively working on. So at the time of this video, we're just releasing version 1 of the Radium app. The next version, version 2, will feature over-the-air firmware updates, but the first version does not have that capability. So when we release version 2 in probably another 2 months' time, that will come with a lot more capabilities, such as the ability to look at your odometer to see how far you've ridden for the life of the board, and lots of other cool features. That one's going to require a firmware update within the board itself. So you'll have to take the deck off, you'll have to connect a USB cable, and you literally just drag and drop a file with a PC. So it's pretty simple, but that will be required for the first update, and then all following updates after that will be over the air, so you won't need to do that ever again. Now, it is a belt drive board, which means that you probably don't want to be riding it in deep gravel where the rocks can get sucked into the belt and cause the drive to seize up. So I mean deep gravel. Light gravel is totally fine. You can power slide and stuff, but if you're in deep gravel and you're sliding, those rocks are going to pile up beside the wheel and get stuck in the belt. And also sand is something that you should definitely avoid, and you'll probably find that out pretty quickly. If you try to ride in sand, you'll find that the belts just jam up with sand instantly, basically, and that's not good, because this board has so much power that it can kind of continue to push through all the sand being crunched into the belt, and that's actually going to stretch the belt and break the belt eventually. But you can still ride this board off-road, of course, just on compacted surfaces. You don't want to be riding it in deep or gravel or deep sand. In terms of water resistance, we don't have an official IP rating. However, we've done our best to make sure the board is as sealed up as possible. If you get caught out in the rain, it's fine. Or if you have to ride on damp roads, that's totally fine. Even going through puddles and things, it'll be fine. But I wouldn't suggest riding in a downpour or riding on the beach or something like that. So without further ado, let's get into the specifics. So first thing we'll go through is the details of the Hoyt Puck remote. Okay, so the power button will obviously turn the remote on, and then you press and hold to turn the remote off. But if you single press the power button, it's going to show your battery of the remote, and that'll be displayed via color. So blue means more than 50% charged, green means less than 50% down to 10% charge, yellow is 10 to 5%, and then below 5% it's going to be red. And then when it gets super low, which is less than 2%, it'll be red and flashing and beeping as well. We've got USB-C charging, so you have a charging cable in the accessories box, but not a brick, so you'll need your own USB power brick. Your mode button adjusts your power from mode 1, which is about 30%, mode 2, 60%, and mode 3 is 100% power. And that's a single press, it'll beep once, press again, beep twice, press again, beep 3 times, and then you're in full power. And then you press again, it goes back to mode 1. The R button here is for reverse. So if you like to use the remote in your left hand instead of your right hand, you'll want to hold that reverse button down until it beeps like that. And then now the remote is going to be in reverse. So when I push on the throttle now with my left hand, it's going to accelerate. And then if I want to put it back, just press and hold. And now when I use my right hand, it'll go forward. So that's reversed. Another feature that this remote has is that if you double tap the power button like this, now the remote, it beeps once and it's showing blue LEDs, it's locked. So that means that I can be, using full throttle, full brake, and the board's not going anywhere. So that's a good feature if you're, at a traffic light or something, you need to pick the board up. It's great to just double tap that and know that the remote's locked, and if you bump the trigger, it's gonna be fine. Now, the Hoyt Puck that we're using for the production Mach 1 is actually the Puck 2.0, which means that it has a Hall sensor throttle system, which is really nice and smooth feeling. But it also means that whenever you turn the remote on, it's going to do a calibration at the start. So what you have to do is when you turn it on, you wait for the lights to turn off, and then you can touch the trigger. I'll show you what happens if you're holding the trigger while the remote is turned on, just so you know. All right. That means that the initial calibration at startup failed. And so what you want to do is turn the remote off. Make sure you're not touching the trigger. Sometimes you even need to flick the trigger back and forth just to help recenter it perfectly. And then when you turn the remote back on, calibrate, don't touch anything, lights go off, it's good, you can use it again. Okay, so that's something to be aware of when you're turning on the Puck. The power modes, when you change modes, it's not going to affect your speed. So it's only controlling the level of torque. It's restricting torque, but it's still going to go to the full speed, even in mode 1. The Mach 1 also has smart reverse. So what that means is that when you hold the brake down far enough, it will actually go into reverse at a slow speed. So let me demonstrate that now. So if you do, say, 80% brake, it's not going to happen. But if you go, all the way, now we're going to go into a reverse, and it's just a slow speed reverse. And you have to be at a complete stop for this to happen, or near to a complete stop. So that's a very handy feature when you're at a traffic light or something and you're trying to balance on a hill. You can just go into that smart reverse, and that'll help you. Now, you can also use different remotes with this board other than the Hoyt Pucks, such as the Z-Mode dual trigger and any other PPM remote. But you have to be aware of antenna placement because this whole board is carbon fiber and metal. So if you're going to switch over to, say, the Z-Mode, which uses an external antenna, you want to make sure that that antenna is outside the enclosure, and especially that the antenna is not near any metal or carbon fiber. So it needs to have free airspace all the way around the antenna. If you have the antenna lying up against the swing arm at the front, for example, so it's against metal, I can guarantee you it's not going to work and you're going to get cutouts. So it's going to be tricky to change to a different remote at the start with the first version of the Radium app, but the second version of the app that we release will allow you to do full remote calibration, and then you can change to whichever VESC-based remote you like. Okay, truck bushings. So at the front we have the truck bushings here, and then you've got your suspension preload adjustment just in here. So when you're adjusting your truck preload, be sure that you're not accidentally adjusting your suspension preload. So we've got double cones as a default setup. So you've got a cone shaped bushing on the board side, and then you've got cone shape on the road side. If you switch to bindings, so you mount bindings, or you're a heavier rider, I would highly recommend switching to a barrel in the board side bushing, just because it's going to not be as oversteery feeling where it leans too far. The R6 trucks use tall height bushings, so just be sure if you're ordering new bushings that you're definitely getting tall series bushings. Now, if the board feels too loose for you, you're going to want to try increasing the preload on the bushings by tightening the kingpin nut. If it's still too loose feeling, you probably need to go to a harder durometer, and same if it's too stiff, you want to go to a softer duro. So let's go through changing the rear board side bushing, because that one can be a little bit tricky. There's a bit of a trick to it. So first thing we're going to do is take off this nut here. Now to get this bushing off, good trick is to just wiggle the truck back and forth like that. Now, to change the board side bushing, all you have to do is tilt this guy back as far as it goes, okay? And then you're gonna be able to get in and twist off that board side bushing, and boom, that's out. So you don't want to try and hit out this kingpin here, because we've actually got a set screw in the side that keeps that in place. So I'm just going to put this bushing back in, and it can be a bit tricky to push the truck back into place, so you might need to stand on it to get it to fully seat in properly. But inside the swing arm here, there's actually, in this pocket, there's a little set screw, and that actually holds this kingpin in place. So if you're gonna take the kingpin out, you need to undo that set screw, but you should never really need to take that kingpin out. So now that we've put that back in, we can put our roadside bushing on, grab our nut and our washer. There is something that we highly recommend doing, which is adding a little bit of grease to the inside of the thread of the nut before you put it back on, because the nuts we use are steel, but the kingpin is stainless steel. So what can happen is you can get thread galling, which is where the friction from tightening the nut can actually cause the metal to cold weld together. And so if we add a little bit of grease, the lubrication will prevent that heat buildup and prevent the metals from sticking together. We're just going to tighten that just past flush, where the kingpin's sticking out. Maybe flush to about 1 to 2 threads exposed is a good range. You don't want to crush it down too much with the barrels, because your bushing's not going to be performing right if the material is completely crushed. So that's how to change your truck bushing at the rear specifically. The front is much easier. Now let's look at the suspension bushing. Okay, so right here we've got the front upper suspension bushing. In this case it's orange because this second batch of bushings that we had made are a new formula, which is orange. If your board came with black suspension bushings, that is the old formula, which are still great as well, in your accessories box. If you have a look underneath, you will have received these 2 bags. These are for that top side suspension bushing. Now there's also a bottom side suspension bushing. This is your lower suspension bushing, which is a different formula. And this one is more for absorbing vibration. And when we change to a different suspension bushing, we're going to leave this one the same. So I'm going to show you that process now for how to change your suspension bushing out. Okay, so we remove the preload nut and the washer. And if it doesn't come off, you can just pull up on the swing arm and that'll come off with it. So I take it apart. That is our roadside suspension bushing. It's shorter and wider and a different material than the top side suspension bushing. The next thing that comes off is the slide plate, which I'll show. So this is our slide plate, and what this does is just reduce the friction and stops the bushing from falling through the slot in the swing arm. So that comes off next. And now we can actually lift the swing arm up, and that exposes our suspension bushing. Let me fix the camera angle there. So now we have our board side slide plate, and then you can get to the board side suspension bushing. So if you want to swap that out to a softer bushing or a stiffer bushing, depending on your weight and what you prefer, a lot of people prefer running a softer bushing in the front and a stiffer in the rear. Now when installing the new bushing, I would suggest adding a bit of grease. So here we're going to use a red rubber grease, but you can also use lithium grease as well. And what we're just going to do, in fact I actually prefer to use the lid, and if we put a bit of grease on the lid here, we get our bushing, and we want the larger side of the bushing, and we're just going to give it a little bit of grease by spinning it around on the lid there. Okay, just a little bit. And that's going to help reduce friction between the bushing and the slide plate. And if you don't want to get grease on your hands, you can stick the bushing to the slide plate and then put them on together. And there's a specific orientation as well. So the little notches in the slide plate, you can see them here. They face towards the board, like this. Okay, slide plate's on. We want to push it in so that it clears when we close the swing arm. Try and get it to click into place there. There we go. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other bushing. So I'm just going to give it a small amount of grease with the lid here. I'm going to stick it to the slide plate, put the washer on, and then that slide plate's going to go so that the little notches in the swing arm line up with the divots in the slide plate, just like that. And that's it. It's as simple as that. And now we're going to tighten this. Again, like the trucks, a good starting point is running it flush with the top of the kingpin, or a little bit tighter than flush, for the rear at least. For the front, it's usually, people generally prefer it to be a bit tighter, so maybe 2 or 3 threads exposed, and what that's going to do is give you a more responsive front end. In terms of choosing the correct hardness suspension bushing, this is how kind of it should look. So plenty of trouble there. If it's too stiff for your weight, it'll probably not be moving much as you're bouncing on it. If the bushing is too soft, this will actually be bottoming out in here. It's hard to show, but you will actually feel it. It'll be resting on the bump stops, and the suspension bushing will just splay out. And that means it's too soft and you need to go to a harder durometer. So it's not just changing the type of suspension bushing, whether it's soft, medium or hard, that affects handling and comfort, but it's also the preload on the suspension bushing as well. And generally you're going to want a different preload for the front and for the rear. And this is something you just have to ride around and test, trying, running it a few turns tighter or a few turns looser. Generally, I like to run mine almost flush at the rear where that nut is quite loose. That allows the rear truck to stay attached to the ground when you're hitting bumps by keeping that rear quite loose. But when you tighten up the front, for example, what that's going to do is give you a more responsive front end. So when you run it looser, it's going to dampen your handling. It's going to be a bit slower of a response, but it's going to stay attached to the ground better. When you run that preload nut tighter, it's going to give you more responsiveness. The board's going to turn quicker. It's not going to be as attached to the road, and it kind of carves differently. You kind of just have to try it and see what you prefer, really. You can also use standard skate bushings if you want in the suspension. So it does technically fit normal, like tall height longboard bushings. So you can experiment with different formulas like WFB, crank or something like that. That's something you can play with. However, the formulas that we've customized for this board are definitely the best for absorbing vibration. So in terms of belts, the stock belts, rubber belts. The reason that we ship them with rubber belts is because the Thane belts, we're still having some manufacturing challenges with making those belts. So what we've actually done is we've included a batch of those belts in the accessories box for you. So you'll see that we actually have a set of Thane belts here in the box. And you can use those if you like. Just be aware that they are a 380 length belt, and the belts that are on the board will either be 375 or 385 depending on whether you got the fast or faster gearing option. So they're both not the same length, so you will have to adjust your motor mount position if you want to switch over to the Thane belts. In terms of changing belts, you've got to take the wheel off obviously, and then it's just these 4 screws up here. Those are your tensioning screws, so you loosen all 4 of them and then you can slide the motor up and down, and you've just got to pull on it and tighten the screws back up. It's very simple. However, if you lose a motor screw, you should only ever use an M4 by 10mm length screw. So they're a specific length. Going longer could damage the motor coils because they are behind where the screw goes into. And then using a shorter screw could damage the threads in the front of the motor because not enough thread engagement means that the screw could strip. And that is not an easy fix. So it's very important if you're ever going to replace the motor screws to use the correct length, M4 by 10mm and nothing else. Just thought I'd mention a quick tip. When you're charging the board, when you take off the charge port cover, do not let it sit on the swing arm right here. I know it's a really convenient spot to put it. It rests really nicely in there. You will forget, you will ride off, and it will stay in there for a while, and then it will fall out down the street somewhere. It's far better if you take this cover off, sit it on the deck, because at least then it's in the way. You will be reminded when you go to step on the board that it needs to go back where it came from. Okay, Radium app speed run because my GoPro keeps overheating. All right, we've got our welcome screen. We're gonna hit scan. And we're going to look for Mach 1. There it is. Connect, and on our front page we're going to get our battery percentage up here, and we're also going to get our battery voltage, motor temperature, and motor controller temperature here as well. We can turn RTS on or off with this slider. I'm going to leave it on. And then the next tab over is our board settings. A lot of these are grayed out at the moment because they'll be coming in the next version of the app, not this version, but we can still adjust things like our remote settings here. The next tab over is our RTS settings. So we've got, for example, RTS strength. So you've got info boxes next to every single one. So if you just tap the info box, it will actually tell you what that particular setting does, and you can just drag the slider to adjust the setting. So we've got our main settings on this page, and then if we scroll down, we've got actually advanced settings as well. And so that just gives us a few more options to play with, but most of the time you won't need to adjust this stuff. And then in our advanced settings, we've also got calibrate steering. So if we go into here, we've actually got a live steering sensor readout. And in this current version of the app, you want to see that at 500, that is the center. If it is not sitting at 500 when the board is perfectly straight, then you can do set midpoint and hit that button, and that's going to reset the sensor into the middle again. If you hit reset to default, it's going to default all of the settings to their stock. So if you mess up, you can just do that. So you can kind of go out and play, and you can always hit reset the defaults if you don't like what you've done. We've got our last page settings. These are all things that are not available in the first version of the app, but you will eventually be able to rename the board, change the units to miles per hour, and same with temperature. You can change that to Fahrenheit as well, but that's not available just yet. A couple of the RTS settings as well aren't available right now, but these are kind of your main ones. So the main ones that you'll find yourself playing with will be the RTS strength. I like it up around 70%. Brake turn strength is awesome. What that's going to do is brake on the outside wheel while you're accelerating at the same time. So you're actually going to have one wheel braking while the other one is accelerating, and that's going to give you even more RTS effect, and it's going to create a slidier, kind of carvier feel. If you want maximum grip, you want that at 0% though. Especially if you're on like a polyurethane wheel, you're definitely going to want that probably at 0%. Expo, this is the one that I actually play with the most these days. So this is going to change the responsiveness of RTS the same way it would change the responsiveness of your remote when you're adjusting like a throttle curve with the remote. So neutral would be at 0% in the middle here. That's going to be completely neutral. So when you lean, the responsiveness of RTS, the more you lean, is fully linear. Now, if we increase this to a positive amount, which I prefer, then it's going to start off really aggressive, the more positive that is, and then it's going to like taper off basically. And then if you go to a negative expo, it's going to start off pretty tame, and then the more you lean, it exponentially gets more aggressive. And so that kind of affects how the board feels in terms of over and understeer. So if the board feels like it's diving too deep into a carve, it's probably because you need to turn the expo up a little bit or RTS down a little bit. So if you turn expo up a little bit, it's going to shift the RTS to be working more in the center when you're not leaning very much, and then it's going to taper off when you go into a deep carve, and so it's not going to feel as intense in that deep carve when you're going to a positive expo here. So that's kind of how expo works. This bottom section here is your RTS settings while you're using the brakes. So it does behave differently whether you're using acceleration on the remote or whether you're braking. So under braking, you've got your strength, so how strong RTS its effect is under braking, and also expo, it's just like when you're accelerating, it's the same thing. There is another slider that will be available in the next version of the app, which will make a big difference as well, traction and turning. So you can kind of prioritize whether you want more grip or more sort of turn in under braking. And yeah, that's the app. We're going to quickly go through how to install urethane wheels on the Mach 1 because due to the 10mm axles, it's not a simple swap over. So we've got MAD 105 here. These are the parts that you're going to need. So we've got the 10mm axle bearings that fit 22mm bearing seats like what the MAD 105 use. So we have 8 of those. We've got our two 16100 bearings, which are the bearings normally used for Radium core, and they are for our Kegel to Radium core adapters here. And then we've got a set of Radium core 45 tooth pulleys here. Those could also be reused from your existing SR125 wheels that come with the Mach 1. We've got our pulley mounting screws, the M4s. We've got our M4 spring washers. There should actually be 8 of those. I'm just missing 4 for this video. And we've got our small bearing spacers that are standard skate width. So those are the things that we need. We'll also need a T-tool as well and an Allen key for those M4 screws. So first thing we're going to do is install our Radium core pulleys onto our Kegel core adapters. So we're going to grab our M4 and spring washer. So put the spring washer on and then we thread our screw in. The production screws are black, but the ones I have for today are silver. I'm just going to loosely put all of these in and then do them up in a moment. Okay, now I've just got these barely loose just to show you that you can actually install the bearing without taking them out fully. So we're going to grab our 16100 bearing, which is what the Radium core pulley uses. This is a mountain board size bearing, and so these pulleys will last a very long time. Without these screws tightened, we can actually push the bearing through. Boom. Okay. Now we're going to go through and do these guys up. Get off. And you want to do these pretty tight. You want that Allen key to flex when you're tightening them. And then I'm just going to go back and go through all of them again and make sure that they're all definitely tight. Okay. So that is one pulley assembly. So these bearings are pretty small, but they are really high quality, and they're not 6mm wide, these are like 8mm wide, so they're pretty tough bearings. Even though we're on 10mm axle, having to use smaller bearings. With urethane wheels, it's not a problem. We're gonna put our spacer in, don't forget that part. And we're just opening up another one of our 62900 bearings. They may be a bit stubborn to go in without using the axle to help it, but okay, so for me, this bearing is being really stubborn. It doesn't want to go in without help. So we're just going to use the axle to help it along. So I'm actually going to pop it back out again, just so it's easier to put the wheel on. And the next step, put the Radium core pulley onto the wheel. Just like that. All right, next step, take off your SR125 wheel. Pull up, spin, boom. Okay, we're gonna push our belt down like this. That's gotta be the 5th time the battery's died today, so excuse the change in lighting, we're on a different GoPro here. There's a thin washer that's probably stuck to the back of your SR125. You're gonna need to grab that off because we need that on there. And now we can put our other wheel on. And of course the spacer is stuck. There we go. I've already pre-compressed this down with the wheel nut. Right, there you are. Cheeky bugger. Okay. So this will help you crush the bearing into place. Okay. It's pretty tight, so now we're going to back off a little bit until our wheel feels like it's not got much resistance. There we go, that feels nice. There's no up and down motion. All right, now we're just going to slide our belt back on. There we go. And yeah, that's done. That's the rear done. All right, let's do a front wheel. We're going to put our bearings in. Spacer. And let's see if we can get this guy in. Or if it's also going to put up a fight this time. Managed to get it in. Great. All right, let's take our SR125 off. All right. Now, there's no washer here, which means it's going to be stuck to the back of our wheel, which indeed it is. So we want to transfer that across. What that guy does is it helps the bearing not get stuck on the taper here, and the taper is important for strength, so we just add that washer instead. All right, wheel goes on. Now you'll notice that I don't know if you can see it, but the thread doesn't go all the way down here, so we're actually going to need another one of these spaces to fix that. You can put the wheels obviously spaced out instead of spaced in, but a narrower track width is usually going to give you more responsiveness, which is what I certainly prefer. Feels more like a traditional longboard that way. So that is how you install mad wheels on a Mach 1. And it's the same for any other kegel core wheel, like a orangutan, dad bod, that kind of thing. Same process. So that just about wraps up the basics of the Mach 1. If you need help, if you need spare parts, just message us and we'll sort you out. All right, cool.